This is Steve Hanley, and I'm with my bestest pal, my greatest pal, my perhaps my bestest friend, greatest confidant, swell partner, comrade, acquaintance, all around decent human being, Kevin Dunsmore.
That's me, and based on all these titles, you're probably going to die really fast in King's Landing.
Why is that,
Just
Kevin?
saying. Well, anyone who has any of those is more than likely putting too much trust in a single person.
But if you can't trust your friend, can you even trust yourself? Let's explore that topic.
Or we can explore Battlefield 1.
Yeah,
The
we can do
alpha's
that.
out. The alpha's out now on PS4, Xbox One, and PC.
You know, Kevin, it's quite a time we live in because many years ago they'd announced a game, and you couldn't see videos for that game. You couldn't play that game for maybe years. Maybe the game would just be announced and you wouldn't hear anything of it for 2 or 3 years, but not anymore. Battlefield 1 was announced not long ago. We're talking maybe 2-3 months at most, and already you can play it. And that's just a glorious time we live in.
Yeah, it was announced the first week of May, the same week as Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. I got to play a few hours of it at E3 at an EA event, and they invited me into the alpha, and I've been playing that for multiple hours since it launched last week.
Now, of course, this is just an alpha. It's not. We're not in beta yet, so the game's rough. The game's early. There's not a lot to see. But what kind of modes can we expect to play so far? And moreover, what modes have you been playing?
Well, right now there are two different modes. There is the Classic Conquest, which is 64 players, so 32v32 on the St. Quentin Scar map, which takes place in a small French town that by the end of a 64-player match doesn't really look like a town anymore. And then there's Domination. They haven't really talked about any other modes, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Team Deathmatch, Search and Destroy, maybe Gunmaster show up in the final build.
Now, Battlefield 4 was a great game. There's no doubt about that. There's no arguing that. But it was held back for a long time, really up until recently. And some people claim now, but I think that's a little bit exaggerated, that it had server problems. You couldn't play, you couldn't log on, you got kicked off, there was lag, all sorts of problems for a long time. Now, of course, this is just an alpha, and only a very select few are playing this alpha, but so far, Kevin, would you say that you've had a lot of server issues?
There have been some server issues, especially when it first launched. I remember having a very difficult time actually getting into a domination match. Sometimes in Conquest there were some weird clipping and glitching issues. Sometimes the game would just crash. But in the days since, EA's kind of really worked on it, and every day has been a little bit smoother than the last. I wouldn't say that we should be positive about the launch, because leading up to Battlefield 4's launch, everyone was positive that this was going to be the big game, the big one that would finally topple Call of Duty, and then it came out and it was just a mess. So while Battlefield 1's in a pretty good spot right now, I would always be weary.
And it's funny that you happen to mention Call of Duty, because without a doubt, one of the most interesting video game stories of this year will certainly be the rivalry between Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Now, as you mentioned, for many years people have been saying Call of Duty is on its way out. It's not doing very well. It's repeating stuff, blah, 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 blah. And every year there seems like there's a new Call of Duty killer, whether that's Titanfall or Destiny or Battlefield 4. And so far, none of them have been able to truly dethrone Call of Duty from its first-person shooter perch. But, as you said, Battlefield 1 is quite a different game. It takes place in World War One. It's one of the only ever shooters to take place in World War One. We're talking early 1900s there versus mid-40s, where most of the World War II games take place. So you have a whole different change, not only in technology, but in the way people communicate, the way buildings look, the way people just dress. I mean, the uniforms were different. So we're talking about quite the different battlefield. No pun intended. So far, I mean, how does this work, Kevin? Is it a good fit for a game, or is World War One just a little bit too old to fit a shooter in?
It actually works surprisingly well, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are kind of stretching historical accuracy. For example, while submachine guns and a lot of these semi-auto rifles did enter the war, they didn't enter till towards the end. They didn't see a whole lot of combat. A lot of the combat was the bolt action rifles, which the scout class has, but obviously the other classes have to have some other types of weapons. So the assault class gets shotguns and submachine guns. The medic class gets semi-auto rifles, which are the precursor to assault rifles. And the support gets the heavy machine guns. It's very fast-paced. It feels like a Battlefield game. It's a little bit heavier, like Bad Company 2, but it's still that fast-paced Battlefield action that people have grown to love and still play in Battlefield 4.
Now, many historians say that World War I was one of the most vicious and brutal wars because we didn't have modern technology yet. We started to roll out tanks and various vehicles, where the Civil War, you didn't have modern technology, but really you couldn't move very fast. So two of the ways that people tended to die, at least in the early stages of World War I, were bayonets and mustard gas. It was a very just vicious kind of physical war, and of course that chemical was being dumped on soldiers. Sometimes it hit both sides. Is there a lot of use of these bayonets or mustard gas in Battlefield?
There actually is. A lot of the primary weapons, a lot of the different configurations come with bayonets attached, and it basically acts as a supercharge. So whenever you're sprinting, if you tap the melee button, or if you push it in, you will start the bayonet charge, and if an enemy happens to walk in front of you, it's going to be an automatic kill. There's also a big emphasis on melee weapons. There are different types in the beta, or in the alpha, sorry. There's a shovel and a hatchet, and kind of the big change from Battlefield 4 is that when you get attacked by melee in the front, you can kind of try and do a counterattack to evade it. With this, it's brutal, and you just die. And then as for mustard gas, it is one of the equipable grenades. So you have a few different grenades to pick from, and that is one of the choices.
Do we see a lot of just kind of typical Battlefield or even Call of Duty gameplay where you're just storming these villages and busting down windows, or do we see a lot of things where you're inside of a foxhole, you're sitting there, you're firing, you're waiting, or is it more faster paced combat?
It's faster paced. St. Quentin Scar is an interesting map in that the area around the A flag does have a lot of trenches, but then as you start going left towards C and B and D and E and F, it becomes that town. It becomes that pushing forward instead of using a lot of foxholes. So I think EA understood that World War I obviously had a lot of trench warfare, but that they couldn't fully invest in that because it's just not interesting for a game of this caliber.
From a pure observer standpoint, or even I guess a participant standpoint, one of the most interesting things about World War I were the vehicles at the time. We are talking about battleships, biplanes, armored trucks, zeppelins, and even horses were still utilized. Have you been able to try any of these? And if you have, do you find that they change the game up quite a bit from something like Battlefield 4, where you're riding these really high-powered, fast planes and tanks and vehicles like that?
Well, it's interesting that we talk about vehicles. There are a few in the alpha. There are 3 different tanks. There are a few planes. There's the Zeppelin. No horses on this map. This map does not feature any horses. I believe that'll be restricted to more of the Africa settings. But it's actually, this is where they're really stretching history right here. A lot of these vehicles did not enter mass production during the war. Only a few of them were ever made because it was still very prototype. You know, tanks didn't really become popular until World War II. The problem is that a lot of them, while they are a little bit more cumbersome than what you see in Battlefield 4, they're still they still drive and handle as if they're a modern day vehicle. And this kind of leads to a problem in the alpha, where they are quite overpowered. A big part of that is that a lot of the anti-vehicle tools are locked away right now. So right now there's really only 2 surefire ways to do damage to a vehicle, which is the rocket gun, which is kind of the replacement for the RPG, and the anti-tank grenade. The problem is, as with Battlefield 4, the class that gets it, the assault class, gets these submachine guns, which are very short distance weapons. And yet with vehicles, having to take out vehicles, they kind of need to be farther away or risk getting mowed down. So at this time, vehicles are a little bit overpowered. I'm sure that once the beta and the full game end up releasing, once we have all these tools available to us, things will probably shift back to being more balanced.
Now, does it bother you personally that the game doesn't seem to be overly historically accurate at this stage in time?
No, and kind of the reason for that is because this isn't meant to be a historically accurate game. Now, there is a lot of historical accuracy in here, you know, a lot of the uniforms, a lot of the guns, they all look right. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comparisons to different geographical locations, and we're going to see a lot of accuracy there. If I wanted a World War I simulator, I could probably go play Verdun, which is another World War I multiplayer shooter, but one that is very historically accurate and very hardcore. Whereas with Battlefield, you know, I expect them to have a certain level of authenticity, a lot in the guns and the vehicles and the way things look, over actual accuracy.
So now that EA and DICE have tackled an older conflict with Battlefield 1, would you like to see them go back even further in time and tackle something like, the Civil War, or the Revolutionary War, or other sort of pre-technology wars?
No. And, well, no with a caveat. The caveat being if they do some sort of alternate history thing like the Order 1886 tried to do, then that would work. The thing that makes the World War I work is that they can stretch it, because a lot of this weaponry and technology did exist. Maybe not the beginning of the war, but towards the end it was being created and manufactured and released. So they can use this to kind of be similar to what we currently have in Battlefield 4. Now, if you start going backwards, like to the Civil War, at the Civil War, the most technologically advanced gun they had was that they were finally able to get the bullet to start spinning in the chamber as it's released. so that way it would travel farther and it would be more accurate. But then after that, they'd have to reload. So World War One works because there is a way to make it feel modern, but still have that authenticity of World War One. As you go back farther and farther and farther, it can't be that. And then eventually you get to the point where it's swords and shields and bows and arrows, and at that point it's a completely different game and it's going to have to be designed differently.
Well, at that point, it sounds like it's Far Cry Primal.
Exactly. I mean, Far Cry made it work, but then again, you look at it and it's all melee based, and the only shooting that you have is your sling and your bow. And so they were able to make it work, but in a Battlefield game where it's a multiplayer and you have to find ways to make everything balanced, including melee and ranged, it becomes a difficult task, something that you don't really have with a single-player game like Far Cry Primal.
And final question for you, Kevin. It's, of course, still early in the game. The game doesn't come out for a good 4 or 5 months. But at this point in time, you've played quite a bit of Battlefield 1, and you've seen quite a bit of Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. At this point, what game would you say is better? And ultimately, the question of the $1 million prize here is Battlefield 1 a Call of Duty killer?
I don't think I can answer that, and the simple reason is that they've both shown two very different things at this point. Call of Duty Infinite Warfare has shown me it's single player, and Battlefield 1 has shown me it's multiplayer. I can't get a good feel until I see both of their single player and their multiplayer portions. What I can say is that I think that this is going to be a very exciting year for shooters. I think that no matter what you like, you're going to get something. Whether you want an older shooter with Battlefield 1 or you want something more grounded but futuristic in Infinite Warfare, or if you want crazy jumping and Titans, then you have Titanfall. I don't really understand why there needs to be a Call of Duty killer. I think Battlefield and Call of Duty and Titanfall and Destiny somewhat can all exist in the same universe and all be successful at the same time.
Well, it sounds like whoever wins, we win as the gamer, so there's nothing wrong in a little bit of competition. Battlefield 1, of course, will come out for the major consoles, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and the personal computer for Microsoft Windows on October 21st, 2016, and that's a worldwide launch. Kevin, I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight and talk about Battlefield 1.
Thanks for having me.